Last month, as conflict intensified across parts of the Middle East, a couple in their late 30s, both American professionals working abroad in Dubai, found themselves trying to book emergency flights back to the United States. The fares had spiked. 2 seats, last minute, international, came to just under $6,000. They had jobs, they had salaries. They had a life that from the outside looked completely put together. They didn't have $6,000 liquid, not because they were reckless, not because they were broke in any traditional sense. They had a mortgage back home, 2 car payments, retirement accounts they were contributing to, and a checking account balance that looked perfectly fine until it suddenly needed to absorb $6,000 by Friday. It couldn't. They borrowed from a family member and made it out. That story isn't unusual. That's the part worth paying attention to, because when you look past the income, past the job titles, past the surface level appearance of financial stability, the actual picture for the average American household is far more fragile than most people expect, and far more widespread than most people want to admit. This video is going to walk through the real numbers behind that fragility, the emergency savings gap, the retirement shortfall, the everyday debt structures quietly expanding the hole, and the passive losses most people never think to audit. Not to make you feel behind, to show you exactly where the gaps are, why they exist, and what the actual baseline looks like in 2026. My name is Alex, and if you've ever felt like you're doing the right things with money, but still feel one bad month away from a problem you can't easily solve, stay with this, because the mechanisms behind that feeling are more specific than anyone tells you. And once you see them clearly, your own financial picture starts to make a lot more sense. I'm going to show you exactly what's eating the money, why the defaults are quietly working against you, and how thin the margin really is for most households right now. So let's start with the baseline. And this is where things get uncomfortable fast. Before we talk about investing, retirement, or any of that, we need to understand what the ground floor actually looks like for the average American. Because if the foundation is cracked, everything built on top of it is at risk. And as it turns out, for a lot of people, the foundation is cracked. Here's the number that sets the tone for everything else. 60% of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $1,000 expense without going into debt or borrowing money. Not 60% of low-income households. 60% of the country. More than half. Think about what that means for a second. One bad car repair. One emergency room visit. One broken furnace in January. That's all it takes to push the majority of American households into financial crisis mode. There's no cushion, no buffer, just the edge. Now here's what makes this stat feel strange. A lot of those people aren't broke in the traditional sense. They have jobs. Some have decent salaries. They're paying rent or a mortgage. They're keeping the lights on. And they're maybe even contributing to a retirement account somewhere. But when something unexpected hits, and something always eventually hits, there's nothing there to absorb it. The money is allocated before it even lands. Think about what that actually means mechanically. You earn, say, $78,000 a year. After taxes, you're taking home somewhere around $54,000. That's about $4,500 a month. By the time you cover rent or a mortgage payment, a car payment, utilities, groceries, insurance, and maybe a student loan, you're looking at maybe $200 or $300 left over at the end of the month if you're lucky. $1,000 might as well be the moon. And look, this isn't a problem that belongs to one generation. That's the part people miss. 34% of Gen Z have zero emergency savings, nothing at all. But almost a third of millennials and Gen Xers don't have enough set aside to cover 3 months of basic expenses either. So this isn't a young person who hasn't figured out the problem. This is a structural problem that cuts across age groups, income brackets, and career stages. Here's why that matters more than it might seem. When you're living without a financial buffer, every decision you make gets distorted. You can't think clearly about the long term when the short term feels like it's always on fire. You're not being irresponsible. You're responding rationally to a system that leaves you with almost no margin for error. The problem isn't your mindset. The problem is that the math barely works, and one unexpected expense proves it. There's a guy, mid-30s, works in project management in a mid-sized city, makes about $86,000 a year. By most measures, he's doing fine. He's contributing 6% to his 401k. That's his employer retirement account. He's paying his bills on time, and he drives a car that's almost paid off. Then his transmission goes. $4,100 to fix it. He doesn't have it. He puts it on a credit card at 22% interest and spends the next 11 months paying it off while paying interest on top. That one mechanical failure cost him closer to $4,700 by the time it was done. And his retirement contributions? He dropped them to 3% to make it work. He recovered, but it cost him more than just money. That's the hidden cost of having no buffer. It's not just the emergency itself, it's the ripple effect. The credit card interest, the reduced retirement contribution, the stress that quietly affects every financial decision you make for months afterward. One gap in the foundation and the whole structure takes a hit. So you can see how this short-term fragility casts a long shadow over the long-term picture. If you can't hold on to $1,000, saving for 30 years from now becomes almost theoretical, which is exactly why the retirement numbers, when you look at them, are what they are. Here's a question worth sitting with. If you knew you were going to stop working at 65, how much money would you actually need to live comfortably for the next 20 or 30 years? Most people have a vague sense that the number is big. What they don't expect is how far short the average person falls. The median retirement savings for Americans between the ages of 55 and 64, the people who are closest to the finish line, the ones who have had the most time to accumulate, is around $212,000. That's the middle of the distribution. Half of the people in that age group have more. Half have less. Now let's run that number. $212,000. Drawn down at the commonly used 4% annual withdrawal rate, gives you about $8,480 a year. That's roughly $707 a month. Add Social Security, which currently averages about $1,907 a month for new retirees, and you're looking at a combined monthly income of around $2,600. In most American cities, that doesn't cover rent, food, and healthcare. That's not retirement. That's survival. And that's the median. That's the person in the middle of the pack. The people below that line are in a significantly worse position. Here's the part that stops a lot of people cold. A full 25% of Americans have nothing saved for retirement. Zero. Not a small amount. Not a neglected account somewhere with a few $1,000s in it. Nothing. 1 in 4 people approaching the back half of their working lives with no financial runway at all. That's not a rounding error. That's a structural gap in how this country thinks about and prepares for aging. Now you might be thinking, okay, but Social Security will cover it. And look, I understand why people lean on that assumption. It's been there their whole lives. It feels like a given. But Social Security was designed to replace roughly 40% of pre-retirement income for an average earner. Not all of it. 40%. It was never meant to be the whole plan. For someone who was earning $65,000 a year, 40% is $26,000 a year. That's $2,166 a month. Groceries, utilities, medications, insurance premiums. The math gets tight very quickly. And there's another layer here that doesn't get talked about enough. Longevity. A 65-year-old man in the US today has about a 1 in 4 chance of living past 90. A woman, even higher. So we're not just talking about funding 15 years of retirement. We're potentially talking about 25 or 30. $212,000 spread across 25 years, before inflation, before healthcare costs, before anything unexpected. That's $8,480 a year. We already did that math. It doesn't work. What makes this especially frustrating is that the window to fix it narrows fast. Compound growth is front-loaded in time. The money you invest at 35 does far more work than the money you invest at 55. Every year that passes without meaningful retirement savings isn't neutral. It's a cost. A real, compounding mathematical cost that gets harder to recover from with every birthday. Here's a concrete way to feel that. Someone who starts putting away $400 a month at 35 at a 7% average annual return ends up with around $438,000 by 65. Someone who starts the exact same contribution at 45 ends up with around $204,000. Same discipline, same amount, 10 years of difference, $234,000 of difference. Time isn't just helpful in investing. Time is the investment. So when you see that the average person in their late 50s has $212,000 saved, that number tells you something important. It tells you that many people ran out of time before they ran out of intention. Which raises the obvious question, if people aren't building savings over the long run, where is the money actually going in the short run? A lot of it is getting quietly absorbed by something most people never think to audit. Not big, dramatic spending, not luxury vacations or designer clothes, just ordinary financial products that are designed very deliberately to cost more than they appear to. Let's start with cars, because this one is more widespread than most people realize. Over 26% of all car trade-ins in the US right now involve negative equity. That means more than 1 in 4 people trading in a vehicle still owe more on it than it's worth. The dealer takes the remaining balance, rolls it into the new loan, and the buyer drives off the lot already underwater before they've made a single payment on the new car. Here's how that trap gets built. It starts with the monthly payment. Walk into a dealership today, and the conversation almost never starts with the total price of the car. It starts with what can you afford per month? And that framing is doing a lot of work. Because once you're thinking in monthly payments, a longer loan term stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like a solution. Stretch it to 72 months, that's 6 years. Or even 84 months, which is 7 full years. And you can put someone in a $45,000 truck for around $600 a month. Sounds manageable, feels responsible even. But here's the problem. Cars lose value fast. A new vehicle loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone. So by month 18, you've paid down maybe $4,000 of principal on that long loan. But the car has already lost $8,000 or $9,000 in value. You now owe more than it's worth. And if anything changes, you need a different car. You get relocated. The payments become unmanageable. You can't simply sell it and walk away. You're stuck. Or worse, you trade it in and roll that negative equity into the next loan. And the cycle starts again, one level deeper. That's not bad luck. That's a predictable outcome of a loan structure that was never designed with your balance sheet in mind. Now zoom out for a second, because cars are just the most visible version of something much broader. The modern economy has become remarkably good at making debt feel frictionless. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the rise of buy now, pay later services. These products are everywhere now. Checkout screens, online carts, even in-store terminals at places you'd never expect. The pitch is simple. Split your purchase into 4 easy payments, usually interest-free if you pay on time. For a single planned purchase, it's mostly harmless, but that's not how most people use it. The average buy now, pay later user in the US is currently carrying a balance of around $830 across multiple plans simultaneously, and nearly 1 in 3 users has missed at least one payment in the past year. When that happens, the late fees kick in, and the deferred interest, which was sitting in the background the whole time, can activate depending on the plan. What started as a convenience tool quietly becomes another monthly obligation. Here's the part worth paying attention to. The fastest growing segment of buy now, pay later users isn't low-income households stretching to cover basics. It's households earning over $100,000 a year. People who, by most measures, can afford what they're buying outright. They're using it anyway, which tells you that this isn't really about necessity. It's about how the product is designed. It removes the psychological friction of spending. And when friction disappears, spending increases. That's the whole business model. And look, I'm not saying these products are inherently evil. I'm saying they're built to expand your spending, not protect it. The incentives are clear if you follow them. Debt traps like these don't care how much you earn. They care about your habits. Which is why the next category of financial mistakes is in some ways even more insidious, because it doesn't involve spending a single dollar. It's the money people lose simply by doing nothing. There's a version of financial loss that never shows up on a bank statement. No charge, no withdrawal, no record of anything leaving your account. But the money disappears anyway, slowly, quietly, and completely legally. And for a lot of people, this version of loss costs more over a lifetime than any debt trap ever could. Call it the inaction tax. It works like this. You put your money somewhere safe, a traditional savings account, a checking account, somewhere it just sits, and you tell yourself you're being responsible. You're not spending it. You're not gambling it. It's right there when you need it. And on some level, that feels like the right move. But here's what's actually happening. A standard savings account at a major US bank currently pays somewhere between 0.01 and 0.5% in annual interest. Put $5,000 in one of those accounts and leave it for a year. You'll earn somewhere between 50 cents and $25. Meanwhile, inflation is running at roughly 2.8% annually as of early 2026. That means the real purchasing power of your $5,000 is shrinking by about $140 every year, even while it sits there untouched. You didn't lose money on paper, but you lost ground in reality. Now compare that to a high-yield savings account. The average high-yield savings account today pays somewhere around 4.3% annually. That same $5,000 earns around $215 in a year. No additional risk, no lockup period, just a different account at a different institution. The money is still FDIC insured, that means federally protected up to $250,000, and you can access it just as easily. The difference between those two outcomes is roughly $200 out of $5,000. That doesn't sound dramatic, but scale it up. Keep $50,000 in a traditional savings account for 10 years, and you've quietly surrendered somewhere in the range of $22,000 in lost interest compared to a high-yield alternative before accounting for compounding. That's not nothing. That's a car. That's a year of college tuition. That's real money that evaporated, not because of a bad decision, but because of no decision. And yet around 80% of Americans still keep their savings in traditional low-yield accounts, not because they've weighed the options and chosen safety, because they've never thought to look. The default setting is costing them, and nobody sends a bill for it. Here's where it gets more expensive. Because the savings account problem is just the warm-up. Around 28% of people who leave a job do the right thing. They take their old 401k, their employer retirement account, and they roll it over into an individual retirement account, or IRA. That's the correct move. That's exactly what the financial guidance says to do. But then a significant portion of those people make one quiet, fatal mistake. They assume the money gets invested automatically once it lands in the new account. It doesn't. When you roll money into an IRA, most brokerages park it in a cash position by default. It's sitting there, fully available, earning nothing essentially, waiting for you to tell it where to go. And if you don't know that step exists, you might not take it. Months pass, sometimes years. The account looks fine on the surface, the balance is there. It hasn't disappeared, but it's not growing, it's not compounding. It's just sitting in cash while inflation quietly chips away at its value. Here's what that actually costs. Say someone rolls over $60,000 at 40 years old and forgets to invest it. 25 years later, at 65, that $60,000 in cash is worth less in real terms than when they started. Invested at a 7% average annual return over that same period, it would have grown to roughly $325,000. The difference between those two outcomes is not a mistake that shows up anywhere obvious. There's no alert, no warning, no one calls you. It's just gone in the sense that it was never allowed to become what it should have been. That is the inaction tax in its most expensive form. So you can see how this short-term fragility and these passive, ongoing losses all stack on top of each other. Emergency savings gap, retirement shortfall, debt traps, money sitting idle. It compounds in the wrong direction. But here's the thing. When you lay it all out like this, something else becomes visible too. The bar to be above average is genuinely not that high. Here's something that took me a while to fully appreciate. When you see how low the average actually is, the savings gaps, the retirement shortfalls, the passive losses quietly compounding in the background, your first instinct might be discouragement, like the hole is too deep and the climb is too steep. But there's another way to read the same data. If the average is this fragile, then the distance between average and genuinely solid isn't as far as it looks. You don't need to be exceptional. You just need to stop doing what most people are doing by default. So let's talk about what actually moves the needle. And this is where most people have the wrong mental model. There's a question worth asking before we go any further. If you're starting from zero and trying to build a meaningful financial foundation, what matters more? How much you save or how well your investments perform? Most people instinctively say returns. Pick the right stocks. Find the right fund. Get the timing right. If you can earn 15% a year instead of 7%, you'll get there faster. That logic feels airtight. It isn't. Let me show you why with a simple race. Two people. Same starting point. $0. Both are trying to reach $100,000. The first person saves 10% of a $60,000 salary. That's $500 a month. They're conservative investors. They put it in a low-yield account earning just 1% annually. The second person saves only 5% of the same salary, $250 a month. But they're a brilliant investor, consistently earning 10% annually. On paper, investor 2 looks like the obvious winner. Better returns, by a factor of 10. Investor 1 hits $100,000 in roughly 15 years and 8 months. Investor 2, despite those exceptional returns, takes nearly 18 years. The disciplined saver wins by more than 2 years, with investment returns that were 10 times lower. Now you're probably thinking, okay, but that 1% return is unrealistic. Nobody invests at 1% intentionally. And that's fair, but that's not the point of the example. The point is what it reveals about the underlying math. Savings rate dominates in the early years because compounding needs a base to work from. A 10% return on $250 is $25. A 1% return on $500 is $5. But the gap in principal accumulation between those two investors grows every single month, and returns can't close it fast enough when the base is too small. This is the part that tends to reframe things for people. Everyone obsesses over investment returns because returns feel exciting. They're the part you can brag about, picking the fund that outperformed, catching the right moment, and reading the market correctly. Saving more is boring. It requires no skill. There's no story to tell about it. But boring is what compounds. Here's what that looks like in practice. Someone at 35, earning $72,000 a year, increases their savings rate from 5% to 10%. That's an extra $300 a month. Over 30 years, at a 7% average annual return, that additional $300 a month compounds to just over $360,000. Not from a genius, not from timing the market, just from redirecting $300 a month consistently for 3 decades. The mechanism is almost insultingly simple, which is exactly why people underestimate it. And this connects back to everything we've covered: the emergency savings gap, the retirement shortfall, the debt traps, the idle cash. They all share a common root: not bad luck, not low income necessarily, a savings rate that never got high enough to create any margin. Fix the rate, and the other dominoes start to fall differently. So when you look back at all of this, the 60% without an emergency fund, the median retirement balance that doesn't survive the math, the money quietly lost to inaction, the picture isn't just grim, it's clarifying. Because what financially average actually means is living with almost no buffer, making passive and costly mistakes, and never quite getting the savings rate high enough to outrun the gaps. The bar to clear is lower than it looks, one deliberate percentage point at a time. Here's what all of this actually adds up to. Being financially average in America right now doesn't mean you're careless or uninformed. It means you're operating in a system with almost no margin built in, where the defaults quietly work against you, and the gaps compound faster than most people realize. The mechanism is consistent across every section we covered: small buffers missing, long-term savings underfunded, ordinary financial products quietly expanding the hole, money sitting idle when it should be working. None of that is inevitable, but none of it fixes itself either. So here's what's worth watching in your own financial life: not the investment returns, the savings rate, not the account balance today, the gap between what comes in and what actually stays. And that raises a question worth sitting with for the next video. If saving more is the lever that matters most, what's actually stopping people from pulling it?